This is basically a response video to 8RF, a general subject of kind of the transition to, a smaller world where, individuality and unique communities of different personality can still exist in this new world we're going into. And also, I guess, sort of the whole idea of designing the future, how we do that, how we deal with the problems of, global warming and the threat of, the new world order or the one world government, the idea of, the whole corporate oppression, or whatever the right word is, the idea that we're all becoming slaves to the corporations, and just how to maximize efficiency. And there's always parts of that you think more about than others. And this week I was thinking about you sort of raised the issue of oil, and because I had I used to own some stocks and bonds, and so I still get calls from brokers, and so there was these hucksters calling me this week about some oil stocks, production company that basically their business is taking old wells and getting the old oil out of them. And I think with oil at $80 a barrel, they're figuring their properties have sort of maxed out, that they're at their peak value now, and now would be a good time to unload. So obviously they're working kind of hard to find some other sucker to buy their interest, essentially. They're basically selling their own properties short. So anyway, it's the whole thing with oil and the whole sloppy way we consume it, and the whole unfair way we consume it, because the real problem, I guess, with oil is that the rest of the world, even the fact that we're having this conversation, I'm talking to somebody who lives in Bosnia, and another guy lives in New Zealand, and just that we're having this conversation means the world is getting smaller, and we're all, the rest of the world is sort of growing into the technical revolution, and I think rightly they have an expectation now. They have a perception of what a comfortable life is, and they want to live it, and a comfortable life is usually a high energy life, and so the rest of the world is building, it's growing. It's incredible to see, what Chinese cities look like now, Singapore and Shanghai, and you just can't, you look at them and they're more spectacular than New York. They're just huge and shiny, and it's, bizarre. And all that takes energy, so a lot of consumption going on. And so then, the question is who has a right to tell other people they can't grow, that they have to, that their revolution, that their technical revolution has to be suppressed because now there's a threat because of the pollution. And, especially when it's coming out of an American's mouth, it just sounds kind of insincere, since we took full advantage, of every exploitation to grow this country. And to deny other people the same thing, it's like with the nuclear power issue and the rest of it. We have the bomb, we have nuclear power plants, and to deny other countries that right, that freedom, seems unfair on its face. The fact that there has to be some stability and some control seems quite rational. Like maybe people should be allowed to develop these technologies, but that they should be overseen by some sort of international, managed by some international force rather than a domestic one. And of course, I think Americans would grow hysterical if the UN was to be in control of their nuclear production, but it's like I think we're inevitably going to grow into that kind of world. I don't think you need to intentionally create the one world government. I think we're just going to fall into it naturally, because all of us will be discussing our own governments. We'll all be discussing what we like and don't like, and those governments are going to become more and more like each other. That is if we have a future. Like I say, we really have to get through the next few decades. You know, we have to be able to find a way to survive that without killing each other. And so I guess that's sort of the point I was going to also make, is that so I sort of think I'm very pro self-sufficiency. I'm very, you know, I think it's great to have people as self-sufficient as individuals as they can be, and have communities that are also self-sufficient, but not in some sort of dogmatic way, you know, not just to excess. I mean, they should certainly take advantage of greater efficiencies that can be accomplished through you know, broader distribution networks and whatnot. But the idea of duplicating locally some services as even a hedge against some sort of, you know, problem with a national infrastructure. So I mean, the idea of having some local power generation, you know, some water power or wind power or whatever it would be, just to have something. You know, to have some agriculture, to have some, you know, to have a mixed community of to some extent. Obviously, there's some people who just don't have any interest in, you know, community life. I mean, all they care about is their narrow interest, and that's as far as it goes. And they're really not interested in the community part of a living. They just want the access to what might be available to them. And you know, and then other people want a more domestic, if you want to call it, kind of life, a life that has some traditional rationality to it, some sort of diversity built into it. You know, it's a more, almost like the Quakers, you know, kind of living an archaic life, but in a way a good life, a simple life. And so anyway, my point, I guess, would be is like the primary focus in all of this has always got to be, you know, I keep using this analogy in different ways, but it's always applicable, I think, is to create carrots rather than sticks. Instead of, you know, punishing companies for going over a quota or doing something, you know, wasting fuel or doing this or doing, you know, if there was incentives built in where there was some subsidy or some other mechanism that made it profitable to do the right thing, you know, that made it, I mean, that would be the real win. And when you think how much money we've wasted on stupid wars, I mean, really, and you know, the whole buildup of a military, I mean, it's the terribly inefficient expenditure of money. I mean, you're spending money to have people walk around and guard things and shoot things. They don't produce anything. They destroy infrastructure, and then they waste all this hardware. You spend all this money on all this hardware, and they just degrade it and destroy it, use it up, and so then you have to expend more money to build it back up again. All this, you know, it's just a colossal wasted money. And if you think, if all the money that went into these stupid wars went into investing in civilization, you know, there's so much that could be done, and it's you know, it's sort of an obscenity. I mean, there's no other word for it. And the other side to this is, you know, I've talked about it in other videos, but yeah, I really think there has to be a communal or, you know, social or government, whatever the right word for it is, a world, people, human race, whatever. There has to be some sort of competitive alternative that they create for themselves. I mean, they just can't let the corporate rule everything. Corporations just don't have a defense mechanism against going too low, you know, or breaking rules. And so it's just, if you have an alternative out there that's always going to be a minimum standard in an industry, then you always got a defense against corporations going too low, cutting too many corners. And you know, so I think some of that needs to be done. And like I said, it's always a money issue. It's who's going to pay for it, and, you know, nobody likes investments that don't pay off for 10 years. You know, they all want something that's going to be more immediate, and that's where, like I said, there's got to be mechanisms created to give people incentives to think and invest in the future and not just in the present. And but like I said, it's very complicated, but I think generally we're always looking to, it's too short-term, too short-sighted. There's really no vision. The vision thing is missing in most politics. You know, Europe I think is doing better than we are, but it's still messy.